Greetings. Hey, good morning. Seleta, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Steve?
So, how many of you have been to Los Angeles? Everybody. How many of you had a miserable time on the freeways and getting around Los Angeles? So Seleta is trying to fix all that, right? Seleta, every hand in the room went up. And so you've got a big task. And we're talking today a bit about the application of technology and how technology may give us a different future and experience for everyone in this room. And there are a lot of people here in LA. I know you're an enthusiast for autonomous vehicles, but what are some of the other things in addition to that that you're thinking about in your challenge of changing the transportation infrastructure in Los Angeles?
Well, so just for the record, I am not in charge of the freeways. So if you had a miserable experience on the freeways, I will take that to my partners at Caltrans, which is just a sort of a half-joking way of saying that what I'm really a champion for is cities. And the name of the game to get people around cities now and in the future has to be choice, collaboration, and partnership in order to manage the tremendous demand for a resource, which is our transportation infrastructure, that we've basically been giving away for free for the last 50 years or so.
So what are some of the technologies that you see out there that are promising?
So I think to start with, Los Angeles released a transportation technology plan last August called Urban Mobility in the Digital Age. And it laid out sort of how Los Angeles is going to leverage technology to really get to the outcomes that we care most about, whether it's around resiliency or health or just giving people their quality of life back around transportation, equity, opportunity, all of those things. And so what we see in the future is that the city is really a platform for innovation, mobility innovation in particular. And that includes things like bike sharing and e-bike. It includes things like EV car sharing. It includes things like electrification in our parking garages to both provide electric vehicles to the public, but also potentially to provide them to Lyft drivers who might want not own their own car, but want to use an EV car to make a living, as well as things like transit on demand, safety enhancements like blind spot detection on our dash buses, and then, using all of those things to really connect people into the heart of one of the largest capital expansions of light rail and subway in North America, which is underway in Los Angeles right now.
Slowly and reluctantly on the budget side.
So I think for my part, there are tremendous financial challenges, not only around reinventing infrastructure and really leveraging the infrastructure we already have to manage it better, but also being aware of the fact that a lot of the revenue that flows to cities right now comes from parking meters and parking citations. And those two
and jaywalking tickets, slowly and reluctantly on the budget side.
So I think for my part, there are tremendous financial challenges, not only around reinventing infrastructure and really leveraging the infrastructure we already have to manage it better, but also being aware of the fact that a lot of the revenue that flows to cities right now comes from parking meters and parking citations. And those two
and jaywalking tickets
are likely to... We're changing the law, Steve.
I know. I saw your tweet. I saw your tweet. Seleta had a great tweet on saying we got to pass this week because I actually got a jaywalking ticket in LA and went to jail for it. Anybody have that happen?
You went to jail?
Yeah, because it's a long story. We don't have time. I went to jail. I refused to pay it, and so I got picked up in Santa Monica and thrown in jail.
Oh,
it's a true story.
Yeah.
It's a black spot on my career, my jaywalking ticket. In any case, thank you for the but back to the revenue impacts of actually getting rid of, taking revenue out of, I guess, the punishment side of transportation.
Well, also parking meters. I mean, that's $52 million a year in Los Angeles. Just parking meter revenue. And that money doesn't go to transportation. It actually goes to fund police, fire, parks, libraries, those kinds of things. If that revenue stream diminishes or disappears, we're going to have a tremendous challenge to think about how do we price and deliver the basic services that cities provide, let alone the infrastructure. But setting aside the dollars for a minute, I think the biggest challenge is really going to be around whether or not the public and private sectors can partner with each other. And I was just listening in to Andrew's remarks previously about Uber. I'm going to cut him some slack because he's from Canada, which I guess now has taken over as America in the last few months. But I think that actually partnering with companies like Uber has been an enormous challenge and has not gone well for cities, and that Uber has actually sort of helped us understand what some of the issues might be with autonomous vehicles, that they actually pull riders off public transit and increase congestion. So as we think about how does the public sector remain in the business of delivering public transit as a public good, and how does the private sector come to the table as a partner, that's going to be the challenge for cities. The money we'll figure out.
When you sit in with other of your colleagues in Los Angeles, with the folks that are doing labor and infrastructure and education, second chance economy stuff, are you worried at all? I mean, I'm trying to, your driver in a way is to create less congestion, more safety, and I know that you want to bring in just smarter systems that save on a lot of fronts. But one of the costs that people fear is there are a lot of people that are relatively unemployed, low on the employment scale, whose livelihoods depend upon driving buses, driving trucks, driving these cars. And I'm interested in whether or not you feel you have a responsibility to help answer that part of the equation.
Absolutely. And I think that transportation has a tremendous role to play in dealing with equity, which includes using transportation to build prosperity, and also making sure transportation is a connective tissue to opportunity for people who don't otherwise have it, whether that's through jobs, sort of good middle-class jobs that you can get as a transit operator in Los Angeles, or potentially working for the gig economy. And I think that the future of labor is a really important question. I actually think there will always be a role for a human on the bus or lift line or whatever the product is you're talking about, for a few reasons. One is, next time you're in a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft, ask your driver what the craziest thing is that somebody has ever done in their car, and the answers that you get will probably not surprise you too much, but this is how people are behaving with a chaperone in the vehicle. I know for myself as a woman, I'm not going to feel comfortable late in the evening following a Lyft line and getting into the car with who knows who. Right. I also think that as somebody who takes the bus every day, the transit operator does so much more than drive the bus. Right. They give people directions, they give people a break if they're a dime short on the fare. They help older adults and people with disabilities on and off the bus, and they keep order. So I think what we've done in Los Angeles is actually, for our taxi drivers, eliminate the taxi driver test, which was essentially just an English proficiency test, and replaced it with 2 to 3 hours of customer service training. So I think that as a transportation agency, I have a responsibility to think about what are the future skills that I can start investing in now, whether it's my transit operators or taxi drivers, to make sure that there's still tremendous value added in the future.
Seleta, I know you have colleagues around the country in other major cities, Chicago, Denver, Dallas, New York, that are engaged in this. What do you think you're doing better than anyone else in the country, and what do you think you could learn from other parts of the country on the transportation challenge?
So I think that what
I think you gave me an Anderson Cooper eye roll right there.
I would describe it more as a Michelle Obama side eye, but we'll allow it. So I think that what Los Angeles has done actually first, and I won't say better, but first, is we put together a transportation technology strategy that has short, medium, and long-term actions to get the city ready for the arrival of autonomous vehicles. But more importantly, we actually laid out a vision in that strategy of what we want. Technology and transportation should serve the city and not the other way around, which is sort of the way that things have gone and the way that things feel like they are going right now. If cities don't sort of make a clear sort of flag about what we want out of the future of transportation. What we could certainly learn from other cities, cities like Toronto, for example, have done exceptional work around how they use data and how they use data to solve sort of real world problems. Cities like Seattle and Portland have done amazing work in truly investing in sort of making those alternative modes, bus, bike, walk, whatever it is, competitive, time competitive, and cost competitive with driving alone. And of course, I think the city of New York led the way in some of the most progressive street designs in the country. I think under Gabe Klein's leadership, Washington, D.C. and Chicago showed us the way in terms of really welcoming technology into transportation. So, there are amazing things to learn from a variety of cities. I could go on and on. Austin taught us some great lessons about what happens when Uber and Lyft leave your city and what comes in to fill the gap. So it's a great time to be in transportation.
Now, I know that you've been concerned that the federal government, and particularly the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, I think the NHTSA, is that right? That you worry that they could try a one-size-fits-all regulatory approach when it comes to the deployment of autonomous vehicles, and you think I think you think there should be some carve-outs in that. What do you think the federal government? We're in Washington D.C. right now. I won't ask who from the NHA, and they're watching. I'm sure Big Brother is here. So, but what message do you want to send to those in Washington that are working on public policy when it comes to autonomous vehicles?
I think that the biggest, I heard a question earlier about how will this be different in suburban and rural America than in urban America. And I think that whenever we try and write policy that applies from the mountains of Maine to the deserts of Arizona, it fails. It fails all of us because it fails to recognize the dramatically different contexts and needs that those different roadways require and that those different transportation systems have. A vehicle that can deal with, a rural highway in my home state of Mississippi may or may not be able to deal with Market Street in downtown San Francisco. And the needs of those two places are very, very different. And so I understand that we don't want to create a patchwork that sort of hinders innovation, but I feel like whenever I hear somebody say that, it has a chilling effect on the real discussion we need to have about how these things can solve different problems. So they need to be tested differently. They need to be working for different applications. A lightweight transit buggy that can, work in downtown Los Angeles shouldn't have to undergo the same kind of rigorous testing as a truck that needs to work, do work in sort of rural America. So I think that those are the things that I hope that we get right with this set of national regulations that we've gotten wrong with other kinds of national regulations around transportation.
Do you think your government colleagues, your federal government colleagues are hearing that? Do you think they're on that track?
I think that, that was that
Michelle Obama side thing again. Yeah.
That was my thinking pace, Steve. So I think that the federal government, when they came out with their first rulemaking, the word urban appeared in those rules, I think, once, if at all. So, but, at the state level, we've actually, I think California has been out on the bleeding edge of trying to figure out sort of how regulations should work in a place where they are really listening to what cities are asking for. And we've had a lot of really good conversations, and the rulemaking here, I think, is moving in a smarter, more thoughtful direction. So, maybe there is a balance between what happens at the federal level and what happens at the state level. I just hope that cities keep local control over things like speed limits and enforcement, things that we have to have in order to manage our city safely.
Just finally, in the last 30 seconds, Seleta, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank you in advance. This has been terrific, and we should have you at all of our conferences on Skype at least. But I'm interested because you are now looking at the way patterns and habits in transportation are changing and how a new generation is looking at transportation differently. And I used to live in Los Angeles, and I saw how congested it was, and I saw how sometimes communities came together and sometimes sort of communities ignored each other. How is the changing generation changing your map, your dashboard of what you think you need to put your bets on in transportation?
So I think that there are two generations that are changing the way we think about transportation. One is the one that maybe you're referring to, the millennials. And, you know, we did some work in Hollywood where there's already a 50-50 split between people who are driving alone and people who are using some other mode to get around. And what we found is that of those people who are using some they're not driving by themselves in their car, over 35 were mostly on the bus, biking and walking. Under 35 were uniformly on Uber and Lyft, right? So that gives you a little precursor to how those other modes are failing at the user experience and really connectivity for people under 35. And if some point in the future those two companies are no longer as heavily subsidized with venture capital as they are, and they become incredibly expensive, we're going to have a real situation on our hands. We have to make those other modes competitive and improve the transportation happiness and user experience that people have when using them so that they remain viable. The other generation, though, is older adults, my mother's generation and the boomers, who are, many of them, on the verge of losing their driver's licenses in the next 10 years. And as comfortable as they are with technology, they're not as comfortable with smartphones. So we think about issues with older adults, whether it's isolation, depression, and those kinds of things, the need for caregivers to support them. We're not doing enough yet to create the kinds of connections and the kinds of user-friendly, affordable, reliable transportation to help extend sort of a high quality of life for our parents' generation. So on both of those ends,